Welcome to They Deep Dive. Today we are taking a tour through, well, probably the most demanding and exquisitely engineered system in your body.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about the vascular supply and drainage of the brain.
The brain.
I mean, the statistics are just staggering, right? This 3-pound organ demands 15% of your total cardiac output.
Right. And it guzzles a full quarter of all the oxygen you breathe. It's just an energy hog.
It really is.
And that dependency, it creates a system that operates on a real razor's edge.
Mm.
What makes this topic so clinically critical is the immediate consequence of failure.
Okay.
An acute interruption of that blood flow, even for just a few minutes, leads to permanent neurological injury. That's the definition of an ischemic stroke.
So we're tracing a system where complexity equals risk.
That's a perfect way to put it.
Absolutely. So our mission today is to try and visualize this highway system. We want to replace those intimidating anatomical diagrams with a clear guided map.
Good.
We're dealing with a dual arterial system. The high-volume anterior circulation, mostly from the internal carotid arteries,
Yep.
and the posterior circulation, supplied by the vertebral arteries. And these two massive systems meet at the base of the brain in this critical safety net.
The circulus, arteriosus, cerebri.
Or the Circle of Willis, as most of us know it.
Exactly.
So let's start that journey.
Let's begin the ascent with the internal carotid artery, the ICA. It's the primary supplier to the forebrain.
Right.
It starts its journey way down in the neck at the bifurcation of the common carotid. That's roughly at the level of C4.
And its path into the skull is what's really fascinating. It forms what anatomists call the carotid siphon.
Yes, that distinct S shape.
So why the S shape? I mean, why wouldn't it just take a straight shot up into the brain?
That's a great question. That S shape, the siphon, it's a brilliant piece of natural engineering.
Okay.
Think of it as a shock absorber. The brain is perfused by these tiny, delicate vessels, and we have to dampen the pulsatil force of the heart before the blood hits them.
Ah, I see.
So that S-shaped course inside the skull helps cushion and reduce that pressure variability, protecting all the deeper structures.
That makes perfect sense. So let's detail its path inside the cranium, the first two segments.
Okay, so once it's inside the temporal bone, we hit the petrous part of the ICA. It ascends through the carotid canal.
Uh-huh.
And it's separated from the middle ear and the cochlea by this remarkably thin plate of bones, a very deep, very protected route.
And then it moves forward into the cavernous part, and this is where the anatomy gets a lot more complicated, right? Because it starts interacting with cranial nerve.
Precisely. The ICA runs horizontally right within the cavernous sinus, nestled against the sphenoid body. And this is a crucial danger zone.
Where's that?
The abducens nerve, cranial nerve 6, runs right alongside its lateral wall. So if the ICA develops a pathology there, like a small aneurysm,
Right.
the compression will directly injure that nerve, seen by eye, and you'll see an eye muscle paralysis.
Wow.
This segment also gives off these small branches for the pituitary portal system. Very important.
And finally, the intracranial part emerges through the dura, makes a sharp turn back, and it's ready to, release its payload. But before it splits, it has 3 key branches.
Yes, the 3 key side roads. First, the ophthalmic artery, which immediately dives into the orbit through the optic canal.
Okay.
Second, the posterior communicating artery, or PCO. This is a really integral part of the Circle of Willis. It runs backward just above the oculomotor nerve,
Cranial nerve third.
cranial nerve third, to connect with the posterior cerebral artery.
And that anatomical relationship you just mentioned, that's a dangerous one. If the PCO develops an aneurysm, what's the telltale sign?
A PCA aneurysm is one of the classic neurological emergencies. Because the PCOA wraps right over the oculomotor nerve, any swelling from the aneurysm will squeeze that nerve first.
So what does that look like clinically?
Clinically, you get a CN through a palsy. The eyelid droops, the pupil dilates, and the eye turns down and out. So yeah, a simple droopy eyelid can be the warning sign of a potential vascular catastrophe.
That's a powerful connection to visualize. What about that third branch, the anterior carotid artery? It's tiny, but you said it's critical.
Small but mighty, absolutely. It crosses the optic tract and supplies vital deep structures. The globus pallidus.
Which regulates movement.
Exactly. And a significant chunk of the posterior limb of the internal capsule. And you have to remember, the internal capsule is the superhighway for all motor and sensory commands going between the cortex and the body.
So its small size and deep location just make it incredibly high risk.
Very high risk.
Okay, so now for the grand finale of the ICA. It's two major terminal branches that supply these massive cortical territories. Let's start with the one that sweeps over the top into the midline, the anterior cerebral artery, the ACA.
The ACA is the smaller of the two. It passes anteromedially into the great longitudinal fissure, and it travels parallel to its twin on the other side.
And they're linked by the anterior communicating artery.
A very short link. And the ACA's territory. It's the entire medial surface of the cerebral hemisphere.
And this is where visualizing that motor map, the homunculus, is so key. If you picture that little person mapped on the cortex, the ACA is supplying the area for the lower limb.
That's the classic rule. If a patient has an ACA stroke, the paralysis and sensory loss will primarily affect the contralateral leg and foot.
And its deep branches.
Its central branches, like the medial striate artery, are just as critical. They dive deep to supply the head of the caudate nucleus and the anterior internal capsule.
Okay, now for the largest terminal branch, the massive middle cerebral artery, the MCA. It effectively runs out of sight, deep in the lateral or sylvian fissure.
The MCA is the workhorse, no question. It supplies the vast majority of the lateral surface of the hemisphere.
So its territory covers pretty much everything the ACA misses.
Everything. The cortical areas for the arm, trunk, face, and critically, the speech centers and the auditory cortex. This is why MCA strokes are so common and so often devastating. They can hit major motor and language areas at the same time.
And the MCA has its own highly vulnerable deep branches, too.
Yes, its central branches are the lateral striate or lenticulostriate arteries. These are the tiny vessels that penetrate the anterior perforated substance to supply the basal ganglia and that internal capsule, that motor superhighway again.
And they take off almost at a right angle from the high-pressure MCA, which that's what makes them so fragile?
That's exactly it. They're small, deep, and they are essentially end arteries with no collateral supply.
Yeah.
They're notoriously brittle, which leads to lacunar strokes, small but very deeply placed infarcts.
Right.
It's why one of these tiny arteries earned this ominous old-school nickname, Charcot's artery of cerebral hemorrhage.
Because when the pressure hits, that's often the first one to burst.
The first to go.
That gives us a really clear picture of the anterior system. So let's shift our attention now to the posterior highway, the vertebrobasilar system.
Okay.
This is what supplies the brainstem, the cerebellum, and the visual cortex.
Right. So these arteries are derived from the subclavian arteries. They ascend the neck through the foramina transversaria of the cervical spine. They enter the cranium via the foramen magnum, and then they just elegantly unite to form the basilar artery, right at the junction of the medulla and pons.
And the initial branches from the vertebral arteries themselves are crucial for those lower structures.
Oh, indeed. They give rise to the anterior and posterior spinal arteries. And the largest branch of the vertebral artery is the posterior inferior cerebellar artery, or P/CA.
And that's a famous one.
It is. It's a highly complex vessel. It supplies the medulla and the inferior part of the cerebellum. Its occlusion is famous for causing lateral medullary syndrome, Wallenberg syndrome.
Which really shows how a stroke in the central circulation can affect fundamental things like swallowing and balance.
Absolutely.
So once they fuse, the basilar artery just marches up the front of the pons, releasing a series of vessels.
Yep, it gives off numerous pontine branches, which are vital for the brainstem. Then we see the anterior inferior cerebellar artery, or AICA, which usually gives rise to the labyrinthine artery.
Supplying the inner ear.
Right. And then further up, the superior cerebellar artery, the SCA, emerges.
And there's a really precise anatomical relationship right here, isn't there? The oculomotor nerve, CN13.
Yes, exactly.
It sneaks right between the SCA and the basilar's terminal branches.
It does. And those terminal branches are, of course, the posterior cerebral arteries, the PCAs. These PCAs wind around the cerebral peduncle and extend all the way back to supply the occipital lobe and the inferior temporal gyrus.
So therefore, the PCA is fundamentally responsible for the visual areas of the cortex. A stroke there means
Blindness or severe visual field deficits. Exactly. And its central branches also supply critical deep structures like the upper brainstem and the thalamus, the brain's major sensory relay center.
Okay, so we've traced the two major highways. Now let's bring them together at that legendary failsafe, the Circle of Willis. This anastomosis sits right at the base of the brain, linking the ICA system to the vertebrobasilar system.
Right, via the PCOAs and the anterior communicating artery.
Yeah.
And this is where it gets really interesting. The circle is intended to provide collateral blood flow. So if, say, your left ICA is blocked in the neck, flow should be able to reroute from the right ICA or even the posterior system to compensate.
But the sources make it really clear the circle is rarely functionally complete.
That is the key clinical insight. There's just massive individual variation. The vessels making up the circle, especially those posterior communicating arteries, are often tiny.
So they're too small to carry enough blood in an emergency.
Right, they just can't redirect enough flow during a major occlusion, which means the intended safety mechanism often offers only limited protection, and that increases the variability of stroke risk from person to person.
What about that specific variation you mentioned earlier, the fetal PCOA?
This is a common one found in up to 30% of people. It means the posterior communicating artery is large, and it's actually supplying the PCA directly from the ICA system.
Instead of from the basilar artery.
Exactly. And this matters a great deal. If the ICA system fails, that posterior part of the brain, the visual cortex, is now immediately vulnerable because it's relying on an anterior supply that just shut down.
So when this intricate plumbing fails, let's categorize the consequences. We've talked about ischemic, stroke lack of blood flow, and its high-risk sites.
One of the most common spots for an occlusion is the M1 segment of the MCA. And ironically, a distal occlusion there is often more likely to cause a symptomatic stroke than a proximal one in the neck.
Because the main collateralization is proximal at the Circle of Willis?
Exactly. Distally, those vessels are end arteries. There's nowhere else for the blood to come from.
We have to talk about those regions caught between the major supply lines, the watershed areas.
The watershed areas, yeah. They're the territories at the very border zones between the major arteries. So the frontier between the ACA and the MCA, for example.
And if the whole system's pressure drops?
Those border zones are the first to run dry. They're highly vulnerable to infarcts during periods of systemic hypoperfusion, during cardiogenic shock, for instance.
We've covered the small, deep strokes, the lacunar strokes from those brittle lateral striate arteries. What's the common presentation?
Well, because those arteries supply the internal capsule, a lacunar stroke will typically cause sudden, debilitating paralysis and numbness on the opposite side of the body. The stroke itself might be tiny, but its location hits the body's entire motor superhighway.
Which leads to just dramatic clinical consequences.
It does.
Now, moving from lack of flow to rupture, what about hemorrhage and space-occupying lesions?
Aneurysms, those balloon-like bulges, they love the Circle of Willis, especially at the bifurcations.
And if they rupture, it's catastrophic bleeding.
Absolutely. The PCA aneurysm compressing CNA is the classic example of an unruptured aneurysm causing symptoms.
But a rupture.
That's the sudden explosive bleed into the envelopes of the brain. Right. That's a subarachnoid hemorrhage, or SAH. Blood just fills the subarachnoid space, and the patient will describe it immediately as the worst headache of their life.
A clear clinical indicator.
A huge red flag that a major vessel rupture has just occurred.
Finally, on the arterial side, what about developmental flaws like arteriovenous malformations or AVMs?
AVMs are these abnormal tangles of vessels, a nidus, where arterial blood shunts directly into the veins. It completely bypasses the capillary bed.
So you're forcing high-pressure arterial blood into the low-pressure venous system.
Exactly. And that high-pressure environment greatly increases the risk of rupture and hemorrhage. It can lead to potentially fatal intracranial bleeding.
Okay, now that we've fully mapped the high-pressure input, let's flip to the low-pressure output, the venous drainage system.
Right. These are valveless, thin-walled, and they drain into the large dural venous sinuses, which ultimately get the blood out of the skull.
And we basically categorize them into superficial and deep groups.
We do. The superficial veins drain the cortex's outer surfaces. You have the superior cerebral veins, about 8 to 12 of them, draining the superlateral surface into the superior sagittal sinus.
There's an interesting mechanical detail here, right, about the posterior ones.
Yes. The posterior veins actually drain obliquely forward. They oppose the flow of blood within the sinus.
Which is counterintuitive.
It is. It's thought to be an adaptation, maybe to help prevent the vessel wall from collapsing when intracranial pressure shoots up dramatically.
That's fascinating. And how are the deep structures handled?
The deep brain, the basal ganglia, the thalamus that's drained by the internal cerebral veins, these two veins run parallel to each other just beneath the corpus callosum.
Okay.
They unite to form a short single median trunk called the great cerebral vein, or the vein of Galen, and that empties directly into the straight sinus.
Which brings us to the key pathology of the drainage system, intracranial venous sinus thrombosis, a blocked vein.
Right, and this raises a fundamental contrast to an arterial stroke. When a sinus thromboses, or clots, it blocks the venous outflow. So pressure backs up,
Venous hypertension.
venous hypertension,
Right.
and that rising pressure reduces the gradient that pushes fresh arterial blood into the tissue. The end result is a venous infarction,
Which is often hemorrhagic.
often hemorrhagic, because that high pressure ruptures the capillaries.
Yeah.
So it's not just a lack of blood coming in, it's a blocked overflow drain that poisons the system and causes bleeding.
That's a huge difference.
It is. Deep system thrombosis affects critical midline structures like the thalami. Superficial thrombosis affects the hemispheres. And a key feature is the tendency for bilateral involvement, because a major sinus like the superior sagittal runs right down the midline, draining both sides.
So to put it all together, what does this all mean? We've traced this dual high-pressure arterial highway from the neck through the protective S-bends of the ICA, meeting at the often flawed Circle of Willis. We've mapped the specific regional supplies, the ACA for the lower limb, the PCA for vision, and we've contrasted all that with the low-pressure, thin-walled venous return.
I think the final takeaway for you, for the listener, is the appreciation of anatomical vulnerability. The brain isn't just dependent on constant fuel, it's dependent on the minute-by-minute integrity of these pathways.
Right.
And we've seen how small anatomical variations, like that fetal PCOA, or just the fragility of those deep perforating vessels, can dramatically alter the clinical outcome when a crisis hits. That fail-safe system is far from universal.
A truly challenging and critical chapter of neuroanatomy. Thank you so much for allowing us to deep dive into the complex circulation of the central nervous system.